The notification lit up my phone at 11:47 on a Tuesday night, and I remember thinking it was strange because my daughter hadn't texted me in 6 weeks. I was sitting in the reading chair by the window, the one my husband Gerald had picked out 32 years ago at a yard sale in Decatur because he said the color matched my eyes. I had a cup of chamomile cooling on the side table and a library book open in my lap, though I hadn't turned a page in 20 minutes. Some nights are like that. You hold a book and your mind goes somewhere else entirely. When I saw Sandra's name on the screen, something shifted in my chest. Not hope exactly. Something more careful than hope. I'd learned by then to be careful. Mom, I know we haven't talked in a while. Marcus and I found a place. Moving into Harrington Tower next month. Thought you should know. Don't make it weird. I read it 3 times. Don't make it weird. I set the phone face down on the armrest and looked out at the street below. A car passed slowly, its headlights sweeping across the ceiling of my apartment. I thought about everything I might have said, everything I'd rehearsed in the mirror during those 6 weeks of silence. All the calm and reasonable words I'd arranged like furniture in an empty room. Then I thought about Harrington Tower, and I didn't say anything at all. I should tell you something about Sandra, because she wasn't always the person she became. When she was 9 years old, she used to crawl into bed with me on Saturday mornings and read the comics out loud in funny voices, and she'd laugh so hard at her own impressions that she'd fall off the pillow. When she was 16, she drove 2 hours with me to my sister's funeral without being asked, just showed up at my bedroom door with her car keys and said, "I'm coming. Mom, put your shoes on." She was good. She was genuinely, fundamentally good. And sometimes I think that's what made everything that followed so hard to understand. Gerald died when Sandra was 26. Heart attack, the kind that doesn't warn you first. He was in the garage on a Saturday afternoon, and then he wasn't anywhere at all. Sandra flew home from Denver and stayed with me for 2 weeks, and she cried in a way I hadn't seen since she was small. We held each other up through those weeks. I thought we would always know how to do that for each other. What I didn't know was that grief changes some people in directions you can't predict. Sandra went back to Denver and threw herself into work, and a year later she met Marcus at a conference in Chicago. He had money and confidence and opinions about wine. Within 6 months, they were engaged. Within a year, they were married in a venue that cost more than I made in 3 years as a school nurse. I paid for what I could. Sandra never asked me to, but she also never told me not to. And I drained a significant portion of my savings because I wanted her to have the wedding she dreamed about. Marcus's parents flew in from Connecticut, and they were pleasant enough. The kind of pleasant that keeps you at arm's length without ever saying a rude word directly. The problem started small. A comment Sandra made once about my shoes at Christmas dinner. A correction she offered in front of Marcus's colleagues about how I pronounced a word. A phone call that went from warm to strained whenever the topic turned to money or careers, or what I'd been doing with myself. Little things. The kind of thing you can dismiss once, twice, 6 times, before you finally have to stop dismissing them. The moment I couldn't dismiss came 14 months ago at Marcus's firm's anniversary dinner. Sandra had invited me. She had called me herself, told me to dress nicely, said it would be a good chance for me to meet some of Marcus's colleagues. I bought a new dress. I had my hair done. I drove 40 minutes to a restaurant where the menu didn't have prices on it. I was introduced 3 times that evening. Once as my mother, once as she used to be a nurse, and once to a couple whose names I never caught. As she's from Georgia originally, you can probably tell. I didn't make a scene. I smiled and held my water glass and told the woman across from me that her earrings were beautiful, which they were. But I watched Sandra's face when she introduced me, watched the slight tension around her eyes, the way she angled her body just a degree or 2 away, as though I were something she needed to manage, rather than someone she loved. And I understood something I hadn't let myself understand before. She was ashamed of me. Not of anything I'd done. Not of any failure or flaw or mistake I could name and fix. Just of me. Of what I represented to the people she was trying to impress. Of the fact that I existed in the wrong category. I drove home in silence that night. Not sad silence. Something quieter than sadness. 2 weeks later, Sandra called to tell me that she thought it was better if we had some space. That she loved me, but things had been tense and she needed time to sort through her feelings. I listened. I said I understood. And when I hung up, I sat with the fact that my daughter had just told me she needed space from the person who had held her head when she had the flu and taught her to drive in an empty parking lot on a Sunday afternoon and spent 17 years making her lunches and checking her homework and being the floor she stood on. I gave her the space. 6 weeks of it. And then she texted me about Harrington Tower. Now here is the thing I need to tell you. I am 63 years old. I spent 22 years as a school nurse in the Atlanta public school system, and I was good at my job, and I saved a modest amount of money every year, and I invested it carefully. Gerald had an insurance policy. Not a large one, but it was something, and I put it into a fund that a financial advisor I trusted had recommended, and over the years that fund grew in ways I hadn't fully predicted. I am not wealthy. I want to be clear about that. I am not the kind of person who owns multiple homes or takes vacations on private planes, but 5 years ago, when a small real estate investment group I'd been part of for nearly a decade pooled resources to develop a mixed-use property on the north side of Atlanta, I was one of the founding investors. I contributed enough to hold a meaningful stake. We hired a management company. We named the building Harrington Tower. I had named it after Gerald, his mother's maiden name. I thought it was a nice way to keep something of him in the world. Sandra did not know any of this. In the years since Gerald died, I had kept my financial life largely private, not out of secrecy, but because Sandra had stopped asking about my life in the way she used to, and I had stopped volunteering information that didn't seem to interest her. She knew I had savings. She knew I lived comfortably in my apartment. She did not know about the investment group or the building or the fact that my name, alongside 4 partners, appeared in the ownership documents for the place she and her husband had just selected as their next home. I sat with that knowledge for 3 days. Then I called my investment partner, a woman named Claudette who has been my friend since before Sandra was born, and I told her what had happened. Claudette was quiet for a long moment. "Dorothy," she said, "what are you going to do?" I told her I wasn't sure yet, but I asked her not to use my name when Sandra and Marcus came in for the lease signing. I was listed through my holding company in most documents anyway. I asked Claudette to handle the initial meeting herself and let me know what happened. I want to be honest with you about my intentions at that point, because I think it matters. I was not planning revenge. I was not constructing a trap. What I was doing was something more private than that. I wanted to see who my daughter was when she thought I wasn't watching. I wanted to know if the woman who'd said she needed space from me was the same woman who would walk into a building I'd helped build and never think to ask who owned it. I wanted the truth. I just wanted the truth. The lease meeting was on a Thursday afternoon. Claudette called me that evening. They came in together, she said. Marcus did most of the talking. Sandra sat next to him and didn't say much. They want the corner unit on the 8th floor. I asked how they were. Claudette paused. They were polite, very polished. Marcus asked about the investment history of the building, mentioned he had some background in commercial real estate. He asked who the ownership group was. I waited. Sandra didn't ask anything, Claudette said. She just looked around the office. I have a picture of you and me at the ribbon cutting on my desk, Dorothy. She looked right at it and didn't say a word. I thought about that picture. Claudette and I were both laughing in it, holding plastic champagne flutes, standing in front of the main entrance with our arms around each other. I am not in disguise. I am not unrecognizable. I am exactly myself, smiling at a camera on a day that mattered to me. Sandra had looked at a photograph of her mother and had not seen her mother. I sat with that for a long time after I hung up. The building had a tenant appreciation event the following month, the kind of thing Claudette organized every quarter. Light refreshments, a chance for residents and prospective tenants to meet the management team, walk the common spaces. Sandra and Marcus hadn't signed yet. They were still in the consideration phase, Claudette had told me, comparing Harrington against 2 other properties. They'd been invited to the event as prospective tenants. I decided to go. I wore what I always wear when I attend these functions. A good blazer, comfortable shoes, the pearl earrings Gerald gave me for our 20th anniversary. I am not a person who performs elegance. I am a person who is comfortable in her own skin, and it took me the better part of 6 decades to get there, and I am not going to apologize for it. The event was on a Saturday afternoon. The rooftop terrace, which overlooks a stretch of the city that always takes my breath a little, had been set up with round tables and flower arrangements. Claudette met me at the elevator. She squeezed my hand once and said nothing else. I saw Sandra before she saw me. She was standing with Marcus near the far railing, talking to another couple. She was wearing a pale blue dress, and her hair was the way she'd always worn it since she was young, straight and dark past her shoulders. She laughed at something the other man said, and it was her real laugh, the one that crinkles her eyes, and something in my chest pulled in a direction I hadn't expected. I am her mother. I have known her laugh for 34 years. That doesn't go away just because she needs space. I took a glass of sparkling water from a passing tray and walked to the railing on the opposite side of the terrace. A woman I recognized from the second floor nodded at me. A man who'd moved in 3 months ago asked me how I felt about the new cafe on the ground floor. I told him I thought it was a good addition. I watched the city below and waited. It was Marcus who approached me first. He'd done a loop of the terrace, the kind of circuit a man makes when he's assessing a room. He stopped a few feet away and looked out at the view, and then he looked at me. "Great spot, isn't it?" he said, not unfriendly, the way he'd talk to anyone. I agreed that it was. "You live here?" he asked. I told him I had an interest in the building. "Yes." He nodded, looking back at the skyline. "We're considering it. My wife and I. Location is strong. Building is well maintained." He turned to look at me with the particular expression of a man who is about to ask a question he already knows the answer to. "Do you know much about the ownership group?" I said I knew them fairly well. "Private investors?" "A few of us," I said. "We've had the building 5 years. It's been a good investment." He was quiet for a moment, recalculating something. Then he called across the terrace. "Sandra, come meet." He paused and looked at me. "I'm sorry. I didn't catch your name." "Dorothy," I said. Sandra turned from her conversation. She walked toward us with her glass in hand, and the easy social smile she'd developed somewhere in her late 20s, the one that arrived a half-second before the genuine expression. I watched it arrive, and then I watched it stop. She was 4 feet away from me when her face changed. Not dramatically. Not the way it happens in movies. It was more like watching a word suddenly make sense after you've been staring at it too long. Her smile didn't disappear. It just became something else. Something thinner. Something working very hard to stay in place. "Dorothy," she said. Her voice was careful. Too careful. The voice of a person deciding, in real time, what to do with information they hadn't prepared for. Marcus looked between us. "Do you two know each other?" Neither of us answered immediately. I set my sparkling water on the railing. I looked at my daughter. This woman I had made and raised and loved imperfectly and completely for 34 years. And I saw all of it at once. The 9-year-old with the funny voices, the 16-year-old with the car keys, the woman at the dinner table who'd angled her body away from me like I was something to manage. "This is my mother," Sandra said. Her voice was level. To her credit, it was level. Marcus went very still. We sat at a corner table after that because Claudette, bless her, appeared from somewhere with a reason to redirect the nearby guests toward the refreshment table. It was just the 3 of us. Sandra's social smile had finally given up and gone home. She looked like herself for the first time in longer than I could remember. "How long have you?" she started. 5 years, I said. "Since before the building opened." "You never told me." "No," I agreed. I hadn't. Marcus was looking at his hands. "He's not a bad man. I want to be clear about that. He's a man who married a woman who had already decided what kind of life she wanted, and he'd built himself into that decision. I don't think he ever set out to create distance between Sandra and me. I think he just never set out to close it either, and sometimes the absence of effort is its own kind of damage." "Mom," Sandra said, and something in the word cracked slightly at the edge. I don't know what to say. I told her she didn't have to say anything right now. "Why didn't you tell me? Why did you let us come here not knowing?" I thought about how to answer that honestly. I told her the truth. I wanted to understand something. I wanted to know if she would walk into a room I'd built and still not see me. I wanted to know what that felt like. And now, I knew. She was quiet. "The text you sent me?" I said. 11:47 at night. "Don't make it weird. That's what you said to me after 6 weeks of silence. Don't make it weird." She looked at the table. "I raised you," I said. Not with anger. I had moved past anger months ago and arrived at something more like clarity. I got up every day of your life, and I showed up for you, and I did it without ever once asking you to be impressed by it, because that's not why I did it. I did it because you were mine, and I loved you. And somewhere along the way, you started seeing me through someone else's eyes, and I became something you needed to manage, and I need you to understand that I know that. I've known it for a long time. Sandra's jaw was tight. Her eyes were bright. I don't want an apology right now, I said. I don't want a scene, and I don't want you to feel ambushed. But I need you to hear what I'm saying. Not because I own this building, not because of any of that, but because I am your mother, and I deserve to be spoken to like one. Even when that's inconvenient. Even when I'm not what you were hoping to present to the room. The city hummed below us. Someone laughed near the refreshment table. A cloud moved, and the late afternoon light shifted across the terrace floor. Sandra's social smile was gone for good. What was left was something rawer and younger, something that looked like the girl who'd come to my bedroom door with her car keys. I know, she said. Her voice was quiet. I know, Mom. Marcus excused himself after a moment. I think he understood that whatever was happening at that table was not for him, and I respected him more for recognizing it. I won't tell you that everything was resolved that afternoon. I am 63 years old, and I have lived long enough to know that the things that break between people don't unbreak in a single conversation over sparkling water on a rooftop terrace. What I will tell you is that we talked for a long time, longer than I expected. Sandra talked about things she hadn't talked about since Gerald died, about the way grief had made her feel unmoored, about the way Marcus's world had seemed solid when hers had gone soft, about the way she'd slowly started measuring herself by a different ruler without fully realizing she'd picked it up. I listened to all of it. I didn't rush to forgive, and I didn't rush to close the distance. I have spent too many years rushing toward my daughter when she moved away. I think sometimes the most honest thing you can offer someone is the space to come to you at their own speed, on their own terms, because they genuinely want to, and not because you've made it too easy to do otherwise. Before we left, she asked if they would still be able to sign the lease. I thought about that for a moment. Then I told her that was between her and Claudette, that I would stay out of the decision the same way I'd stayed out of the announcement of their engagement until Sandra told me about it, the same way I'd stayed out of her new life, as much as she'd asked me to. You shouldn't have had to stay out, she said. No, I agreed. I shouldn't have. She hugged me before she left. It was the first time in 14 months, and it wasn't comfortable the way it used to be, the way it had been when she was 9 years old, falling off a pillow. It was the hug of two people who have some work ahead of them and both know it. But it was real. That counted for something. Claudette called me the next morning while I was walking through the neighborhood, the early morning one I'd been doing since Gerald passed because movement helps me think. They signed, she said. I told her I wasn't surprised. Dorothy? She said. Are you all right? I thought about what all right meant. I thought about the photograph on her desk and the daughter who'd looked at it without recognition, and the daughter on the rooftop who'd looked at me and finally, seen me. I thought about Gerald and the reading chair and 22 years of school nurses' offices and lunches packed and homework checked and all the unremarkable daily work of loving someone that leaves no monument except the person they become. I told Claudette I was better than all right. I was clear. That's the only way I know how to describe it. Not happy exactly, not fixed, not finished, just clear, like a window that's been washed after a long gray season, and the light comes through a little differently than it did before. I kept walking. The morning was cool and the trees on the block were just beginning to think about changing, that first faint blush of gold at the edges of the green. I thought about Sandra. I thought about how long it takes to really know your own mother, and how some people never get there because the chance runs out before the willingness arrives. She had time still. We both did. I turned at the corner and headed home. I've been asked since then, by friends who've heard pieces of this story, whether I planned the whole thing, whether I engineered a situation to put my daughter in her place. I understand why people ask that. The shape of it looks like strategy. But here is what I know to be true. I didn't go to that terrace to expose Sandra. I didn't want her to feel small. I spent 34 years trying to make sure she never felt small. What I wanted was for her to see me. Just to see me. And sometimes the only way that happens is when every other way has already been tried. My name is on a building on the north side of Atlanta. It carries Gerald's family name because he deserved something lasting. I am not a woman of spectacular accomplishment. I packed lunches and gave flu shots and sat with frightened children until their parents arrived and made careful investments over a long and quiet life. And I loved my daughter imperfectly and completely, and that is the whole story. What I know now that I didn't know 14 months ago is this. You can love someone more than they understand, more than they ask you to, more than they think they need, and you can do it for decades, and none of that love obligates you to be invisible. None of it requires you to stand at the edge of someone else's life waiting to be acknowledged. I chose something different. I chose to be seen. And if you are sitting somewhere right now, holding a phone with a text you've read 6 times, trying to decide whether you are asking for too much or expecting too little, I want you to hear this. The people who matter will learn to see you, if you give them the chance. But you have to stop making yourself so easy to look past. I hope you choose to be seen too. Now, if this story reached something in you, something you've been carrying around without quite naming it, leave me a comment below. I read every single one, and I want to know what part hit home. And if you know someone who needed to hear this today, share it with them. You never know what a story can do for someone at the right moment. Take care of yourselves. I'll see you in the next one.